Today we are going to be breaking down the artwork behind this new archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! That I have just come across myself, that being the Eldlich and the Cursed and the Golden Land archetype. I think it's more revolving around Eldlich after taking a look at some of these cards, but I'm excited to talk about this. This isn't a video where we talk about the archetype and like what the cards do in general. This is going to be just flat out appreciating the artwork behind this game, and I'm very, very excited to talk about it, guys. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another video. If you are new here, my name is Kyle. I'm your guy with many YouTube channels. Let's get started with this video right here, taking a look at both Eldlich, the Golden Lord archetype, and artwork. And I gotta say, guys, when I was initially gathering these cards, because if you happen to be just coming across this video, I make videos as a returning player, and I'm learning about different archetypes. The second I started learning about this archetype here, I have always thought that it looked absolutely beautiful, okay? So our journey begins today with Eldlich, the Golden Lord, you know, the main card of this entire archetype. And in this initial design we have over here on the left, he stands before us, you know, with his arms outstretched, almost like he's kind of displaying power. He has some very intricate golden armor along with what appears to be, you know, very precious jewels. He's showing his status and power, which makes sense if you know, like, the deck at all. This dude is the main piece of the puzzle when it comes to everything. And it's very important to note, guys, as we continue on with this video, is this is all just like, you know, how I'm perceiving the cards. I could be wrong. I don't know anything about the anime shows. If they happen to be the anime show, I've literally only watched Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. I don't know anything beyond that. I'm just looking at the artwork over here because it seems to tell a little bit of the story. But we also have the second artwork where Eldlich, the Golden Lord, is no longer, he's just like, no longer like, you know, ascending, getting ready to battle. It's just, he's seated, his posture's kind of wary, taking a look at what is probably destruction around him. His gaze, which is a little obscured by his helmet, seems to be directed outward, perhaps like towards the setting sun that paints the sky like in just really nice hues of orange and fading light. The ground beneath him is a graveyard of ruined architecture, broken pillars, and debris, showing what I would imagine to be him taking over some kind of kingdom that has now crumbled after a war. In this new piece of artwork here, I think it looks very nice, and it displays the idea of just a Golden Lord in general perfectly, in my opinion. I think it looks absolutely excellent, guys. Now, let's continue on a little bit more to the next cards that we have over here, which is going to be the two fusion cards, Eldlich, the Mad Golden Lord, and Fallen Angel of the Golden Land. I'm excited to talk about these two because it's a little bit of a change from the stoic endurance of like, just like, you know, a Golden Lord. We just witness what seems to be, I would imagine, either an attack or a descent into madness. You know, Eldlich, the Mad Golden Lord, is a furious distortion of his former self. You know, the biggest change being within Eldlich's headpiece, which was once probably now a crown, appears to be a little bit more like a skull. And, you know, he has, you know, just fangs on him that just like scream rage. This dude is like, it looks like he's a little bit on the attack, you know what I mean? But then we have, which could be, I don't know if we want to call it the fall, but we have the Fallen Angel of the Golden Land, which presents like the being almost entirely consumed by shadow. The figure, which is probably still Eldlich himself, is now cloaked in darkness. You know, his form more imposing, maybe skeletal from the bottom. And there's also a small zombie-like creature kneeling at his feet. So here he's probably like still a king, or this fusion is just like, you know, appearing onto the scene. It could be mid-transformation. None of that would surprise me, but I think these two pieces of artwork are also excellent in my opinion. But we continue on because now we have, dude, when I've looked at all of these cards, don't get me wrong, when I have looked at every single one of these cards, I couldn't help but just appreciate the artwork behind it, man, because now we have Cursed Eldland. Here we see, like, you know, a nice towering citadel made from just nice, beautiful radiant gold. The colors mirror the Golden Lord himself. And looking at the castle before the entrance, we have two, like, nice looking colossal statues, silent guardians with shields and blades, and all of this blended together, to me, looks absolutely incredible. But unfortunately, there isn't anything else that I could, like, look upon this artwork. All I can say is it looks absolutely beautiful. But we're not done yet because we still have a few more cards to take a look at, which I am very, very excited to talk about. And we're going to start off with the one over on the left over here, Elixir of the Scarlet Sanguine, which I would imagine this is inside the Citadel, which I could totally be wrong about, but the once golden architecture is now shadowed and strained in this piece of artwork. Everything is messy in this place, and we have zombies or mummies walking around or walking away from the power above, which is It makes me curious as I'm going through these cards on like if there is an anime show story behind this, because I think it's all very cool. It's very beautiful. And next up, we have, and excuse me if I'm pronouncing the name incorrectly over here, we have El Dorado Adlentidado, which is a Spanish title, and it means the Golden Ones advance. This is a fitting name for this piece of artwork, and here we're back to Eldlich himself, Eldlich, the Golden Lord, who reemerges not as a king or as a spectator like we previously saw, but like as a force of nature, somebody advancing. He is now clearly commanding an army or something along those lines. Maybe of those zombies moving forward. Here we see Eldlich in a very, very powerful state, and they do him very well, man. When you have like a main card of the deck, I think this archetype and the way this artwork is told is just a very, very cool way of, displaying that. And as we continue on, which we're going to talk a little bit more on how I think that these cards kind of tie in together, and I'll mention that eventually, but I wanted to talk about like specifically the artwork for some of these, because now we move on to a counter trap, that being Golden Land Forever. And here, I'm not exactly sure what we're looking at, to be honest, which we might have a much smaller, I don't know if it's like a doll figure of Eldlich, the Golden Lord. He's seated on a throne carried by 4 armored statues, their faces blank and almost like look lifeless as well, The effect depicts the art perfectly, I will say. Someone ruling and not allowing any other effects to take place in his turn. This is where I was kind of thinking like some of this might be out of order, but again, I want to touch on that in general, but I think it is just beautiful. They display royalty very well with these entire cards. But now we continue on to some spell cards, which is furthering this story just a little bit. We have Elixir of the Black Awakening, which in the first card over here, it shows a vast, circular chamber, which is obviously a ritualistic space that feels both sacred, sinister. At its heart lies a dark pool of liquid, which is a single glowing orb of pure white energy, which is rising up. The scene is quiet, but heavy with anticipation. Something's coming. The figures in the background, they're not the desperate, zombified, figures from the Scarlet Sanguine card that we were talking about. These guys are robed. They're observers. Their backs to us, which makes me wonder if that Sanguine card is something that takes place after this. And this is what I was talking about when it was a little bit out of order, because this seems to be the moment before the storm, which is like, it could be the very beginning of this entire cycle of like what happened to those other cards and things going to crap. You know what I mean? Continuing on, we have from that silent ritual, we have the Elixir of White Destiny, which is like just a furious energy from that orb. The chamber from the previous scene is now full of light and chaos. A character, which is in a red robe like the other card, perhaps is maybe one of the silent observers that we took a look at, is at the center of the blast. The orb is now a just beam of light, sending bolts of energy in all directions, again, causing chaos. And with these two cards in particular, it has me thinking that the original artwork of Eldlich himself, and this is what I was touching on, might be the beginning and the end of his story. One with him like on the move, powerful, taking over, and the other with him, finished after everything crumbles, because the more that I take a look at these spell and trap cards, the more that I could see like, okay, if we were to reorganize some of these cards, then maybe you could tell a story of like, hey, we're on the advance. This is happening. This orb is up. Everything's getting crumbled. People are turning into zombies. Things like that. But as we continue on, we have 7 cities of the Golden Land, which is a continuous spell card. Very fun card, I will say. But, there isn't too much to break down about this one, because this card art presents us with like a horrific, version of Eldlich, which is still likely Eldlich. Like, it's probably more in the middle of a fusion some of the card itself is, where Eldlich is like bonding with some other creature to turn into something new. I wish that I could break a little bit more down for you, but that's really like all it seems. Eldlich is like still on the go. He's still on the attack. He's still, in the middle of like the ritualistic place maybe, but we have to shift our focus a little bit to the new trap cards of the archetype, which again, I still think are beautiful. Now, we have the army, okay, who serve as his probably like what could be a cursed purpose after the Sanguine card and after the 2 spell cards. The Black Awakening, excuse me, whatever the card technically was called. The ritual summon, the orb probably has something to do with this. Now, first, I want to take a look at Conquistador of the Golden Land, and the figure wears an armor of, it's one of those typical Golden Age type armors. He wields a sword, but his expression is that of just a zombie. He rides a majestic-looking horse draped in gold, has eyes that glow with red light, hinting at a maybe a life force that's no longer his own. This is a zombie archetype after all. The Conquistador is, seemingly not a hero on a quest, but a zombie maybe bound by a powerful curse, riding through a landscape that the shadow, has the Shadow Realm mist, shadowy figures, when these guys get banished over the Shadow Realm. It's giving me that same type of vibe. But finally, we also turn over to Guardian of the Golden Land, which is a beast that is just, probably both a protector and a prisoner, judging by, the zombie shade that it has. This saber-toothed creature over here shows its body, covered in thick white fur, but its face and shoulders are encased in the armor that, just scream, hey, this dude's part of Eldlich. His eyes burn with a fierce red light, the sign of its, probably corrupted nature that we spoke about with the card on the left. That's probably going to be again, circling back to the Black Awakening card, I would imagine that a lot of things got summoned, a lot of things got taken over, but as we continue on, we have 2 more trap cards over here. Both continuous traps, moving on to the Golden Land, but let's start talking about the Elixir of the Glorious Golden Land, which depicts a chaotic and powerful moment of creation. At the center of the image, 2 hands, which is more than likely Eldlich. It's holding a swirling radiant orb of energy. From the orb, and I love this consistency with the Rich Lord here, we have a chain of nice little glittering beads, each bead a tiny, perfect, sphere of gold mirroring the wealth of the Golden Lord and the Golden Land. The Lord here is using his power to create something new or bring something new to the field, for a small cost. I think the artwork for it looks very cool and fitting, but we continue on to Huaquiro of the Golden Land, which shows a scavenger or a grave robber in the midst of, a corrupted landscape, that Shadow Realm type thing that we were talking about, which is either that or probably in the middle of the battlefield that we were looking at with Eldlich. The figure is half zombie, his face split between flesh and, just a corpse and a golden mask. He wears the rags of not just a zombie, but maybe a commoner of the land, and his left arm is just pure gold, which could be looked at as maybe part of a transformation. Maybe I'm looking into that too deeply, but he is bent over, he's grasping a handful of coins with, and has some, just random, gold jewels that would, belong to Eldlich probably, or at least Eldlich took over. And behind him, we have 2 ghostly figures, probably, fellow scavengers, I would imagine. They just kind of sit there, haunt the background. Now, something else that I've learned after looking up, apologies if pronouncing this wrong as well, Huaquiro is a term for tomb robber in Spanish, okay? Which perfectly, encapsulates the entirety of the state of the card here. I think all of these look excellent, and this entire archetype was suggested for us to take a look at, and I am so glad we did, because artwork-wise, this is one of the greatest pieces of artwork when it comes to an archetype that I've ever seen in my entire life. So let me bring you over to this other video, because it was probably a little bit quick. If you want to talk a little bit more about card artwork and breaking them all down, then you can check out this video on screen. I would love to have you over there. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Take care, everybody.